Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. I am Darryl Lim, your MC and moderator for today. Welcome to ACM and welcome to our talk, held in conjunction with the Batik Nyonyas 3 Generations of Art and Entrepreneurship special exhibition that is now on show at the Peranakan Museum. We would like to thank White and Case for their generous support for this exhibition. So for today, we are honored to have with us 3 amazing speakers who will be sharing more about the works of Nyonya Oeij Soen King and her contemporaries from the north coast of Java. So first up, we have Peter Lee, who is the author of Sarung Kebaya, Peranakan Fashion in an Interconnected World, 1500 to 1900, and co-author of Port Cities, Multicultural Emporiums of Asia, 1500 to 1900. Peter is also the founding curator of the NUS Baba House and the host of The Mark of Empire on Channel News Asia. And next, we will have Miki, who is Principal Conservator of Textiles at the Heritage Conservation Center. Miki has headed the Textiles Conservation section since 2010 and has served as the conservator in charge for several major exhibitions, including Patterns of Trade, Indian Textiles for Export, and her research interests include fibers and dyes and the technical analysis of historical textiles and microphotometry. And we also have Lynn, who is conservation scientist at the Heritage Conservation Center. Working closely with curators and conservators, Lynn uses multiple microanalytical techniques to characterize materials from the national collection. Her present research interests include Peranakan glass beads and the dye analysis of historical textiles. So today's talk will be split into 2 parts. So the first part will be done by Peter, and the second presentation will be by Miki and Lynn. So just a footnote, the second presentation is currently a work in progress that is scheduled to be presented at a conference and a subsequent publication. So photos and videos are okay, but just a gentle reminder not to share anything on social media. And without much further ado, I would like to invite Peter on stage to begin the talk. Peter, please.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see everyone here on this Thursday evening. This is today. This is part of the series on Batik Nyonyas and of talks on Batik Nyonyas. And in the interest of time, I am just going to give a kind of snapshot of certain thoughts about her life and work of the first generation of the maker. Sorry, this is the background to the story. The 3 Nyonyas, Nyonya Oeij Soen King, Nyonya Oeij Soen, and Jane Hendomatono. This exhibition now at the Peranakan Museum gives us an amazing opportunity to look deeply into the lives and careers of these women, to consider them as artists, and also about how art transmits from generation to generation, and whether in fact there is such a thing as tradition. I am one of the proponents of the thinking that we should stop viewing the past as just in Asia as about fixed traditions, but in fact what we see here is this constantly evolving, perhaps at a slower, different pace of traditions, and it raises many questions anyway, and I hope it does for you too. Just a little background on the title. The idea of Nyonyas is interesting. It is originally from Portuguese. We get the concept of the dona, doña, Nyonya, and it entered into Bahasa, or the kind of Malay language, with ambiguous meanings. It could just be a young lady of foreign descent, not indigenous. But at a certain point, it came to mean Mrs. It also has come to mean Peranakan. So for this exhibition, we were playing with this ambiguity of the title. So it could mean Nyonyas as in Peranakan women. It could just mean Peranakan. It could mean Mrs. the Batik Mrs. so to speak. So it's sort of a playful use of the use of the term. And here we have sort of the key pieces we use to show these exemplary batik makers. I'd just like to bring out two quotations from books that I think are key to thinking about batik. And this one, in this case, in a ladies' magazine in the 1930s. But the idea that women were very much seen as the backbone of batik making. In Pekalongan and other places such as Lasem and Banyumas, which produce batik in both fine and coarse quality, women are also undeniably the hub around which the whole business evolves. This is not to say that men were not involved in the batik industry. Quite often, the branding was in the names of the women, of the wives, and the husbands often played a certain role in marketing and logistics. At the same time, batik making, the waxing and the drawing was done by women, the stamping by men, the dyeing by men. So, you know, everybody had a part to play, really. This is also a really interesting quote from a Dutch Indies newspaper, and it kind of gives us an insight to how we think about batik as well. If you go around from shop to shop in Pekalongan to look for a good product, it will be difficult to succeed. Such products are only made to order, and then often for wealthy Chinese ladies. This really influences the kind of materials we can draw from to study batik, because the newspapers and historians have tended to focus on the well-known commercial producers, but there were all these unknown women making batik who've been forgotten, and they didn't sign their works. This presents a huge problem for us, and they sold only to clients, wealthy clients in small towns all over Java and the Dutch East Indies. And so this history is just lost to us to a large degree. We really don't know much about the lady from the first generation. And we know her as Nyonya Oeij Soen King, literally Mrs. Oeij Soen King. So the Oeij Soen King is her husband. She was born Lim Luan Eng in Pekalongan, and that's all we know. We have also her date of birth and death. Interestingly, she was a year older than her husband, which was fairly unusual at the time, but that's all I can say about her. And we have these wonderful pictures of her as a young lady, a young Nyonya, and her husband, Oeij Soen King. We first got to know about her in Inger McCabe Elliott's iconic Batik, Tablecloth of Java, which came out in the 80s. And there is a story about how and why she, the Nyonya Oeij Soen King appears in this book, and you have to read the catalogue to find out. But anyway, it's a bit of a dramatic story. But anyway, it resulted in the inclusion of some information about this family, and that was really so helpful. In fact, I only personally started to be interested and started looking for pieces because of this amazing story of the three generations. So thanks to Inger McCabe Elliott, who passed away last year. And we have so few photographs of the Oeij family, and this is from 1925 when Oeij Soen King passed away. The family is standing in front of the row of three houses on this street called Pintu Dalam, which is now Jalan Blimbing in Pekalongan. And we have, I think, let's see the pointed words. That's Nyonya Oeij Soen King here, I believe, and perhaps her daughter-in-law, Nyonya Oeij Kok Sing, Mrs. Oeij Kok Sing here. These would be the houses, the row of three houses. At that time, the Oeij family was involved not only in batik making, but also in bird's nest. And I believe it was the success of the bird's nest business which allowed Nyonya Oeij Soen King to specialize in making very high-end batik for special clients, rather than to go the commercial route. So this sort of involvement in other businesses, which was very typical in Pekalongan at that time, by the way. You had entrepreneurial families who were making batik. They were selling musical instruments. They were making herbal balms and bird's nests. The unfortunate thing about the involvement in bird's nests for the family was that the rooms upstairs were all converted into swallow barns, and the dampness it created eventually, at the moment, up to now, the three houses have completely collapsed with the damp and everything. So, the three grand houses on the street were, upstairs, all the rooms were converted to bird's nest barns, and downstairs was for batik making. So you can imagine the environment within. So we fast forward to probably about 1940. So Nyonya Oeij Soen King seated in the middle, flanked by Mr. and Mrs. Oeij Sing. He died in 1941, and the children, she had 5 daughters and 1 son, and they started to get married in the late 40s. So this would have been sometime around just before he passed away, perhaps 1940 or 41, before the war. And here also in the 1940s in Pekalongan. And in the late 40s, perhaps, this is when everybody was getting married. We see her as a grandmother, and with her daughter-in-law, Nyonya Oeij Sing, and granddaughters and their husband and grandsons-in-law. And interestingly, being book nerd and history nerd, this obscure book called Chinese Epigraphic Materials in Indonesia, I found, going through the volumes, there is one entry on the tombstone of Mrs. Nyonya Oeij Soen King. And here we discover, so in Inger McCabe Elliott's book, she is recorded as Nyonya Lim Luan Nyo. And through this and also the family diaries, we've discovered her name is actually Lim Luan Ing. Just an insight to Pekalongan at that time. So from the second half of the 19th century, it became a batik boom town, facilitated by the chap or stamp industry. And you had all kinds of quality produced in Pekalongan, from the cheapest mass-produced types to very fine hand-drawn quality. And here Oeij Soen Kiam was Nyonya Oeij Soen King's brother-in-law, and he was a batik maker himself. And quite interestingly, we can see that although they were in-laws, they had very different business models. So if you look at this, it says that he is a trader in all kinds of Pekalongan batik, from one Hilda, somebody, will you scold me, Sabine, for the excuse my bad pronunciation of Dutch. 1 Hilda 25 cents, would that be right? To 14 Gulden, is that right? And yeah, you can make these orders, and they can be sent by post. So already the train service was very developed in Java from the 1870s. And if you order up to 300 Gulden and above, you get free delivery. And the seller promises to that if the batiks don't sell, you could return it if it's not broken, or get a refund. So I mean that was kind of a batik model of that time. And here is an example of Oeij Soen Kiam's batik. So quite interesting. I just want to point out how, if you look at his level, so this is already fairly fine for that period, but just bear in mind how these bouquets are fairly much, not exactly repeated, but very closely repeated here. And Nyonya Oeij Soen King's work is rather different. And another example of his work, so again, you see this repeats of the bouquets. This is a kind of batik called buketan, which became popular in Pekalongan in the 1880s, 1890s. This modern style that everybody started producing. But here you see the repeats quite clearly. Just a little intro to Pekalongan. So the A is where the family lived, and this is sort of the Pecinan or Chinatown. A and I up to here. G and H would be where the Arab district was. This is the famous Loji Bridge, and the Batik Museum now is just across the bridge here. D is the area called Bugisan, which is now Rajawali. And interestingly, at one point, Eliza van Soylen, there were some Eurasian, Chinese, and Javanese batik makers who all lived here. This is the Herenstraat, now called Jalan Diponegoro. And you had quite a few batik makers living here, Eurasian, European, Chinese makers who lived in this area. J is the Kauman district with the alun-alun next to it. This is the Javanese district where all the Javanese batik makers were. But sometimes you might also have a Eurasian batik maker living here as well. So it was a small, compact town, and all the workshops were, in close proximity, and the river was very much used for washing, and the wells, all around here. So there's a lot of water available. This is the Herenstraat, where some batik makers, and on this side is the Chinatown, and Pintu Dalam would be parallel to this, and the Wee family lived further along here. And Keplekan, which is parallel to Pintu Dalam, was kind of the high street where all the batik shops and businesses were. And here we have Mrs. van Soylen's house, decorated in 1923 for the big festival, for the first big year market or Jahrmarkt or fair. So all those pictures come from this amazing book, which is on display at the exhibition. It is the Pekalongan Jahrmarkt Association. The Jahrmarkt is the annual fair. It was a book dedicated to the patron Jasper in September 1923. There is Jasper, I think, and his wife, and at the opening in 1923. And also, interestingly, it has this batik fair, and where all the producers in the town presented cloths for this exhibition. A wide variety. What's interesting is Pekalongan by that time could produce batik in any style. So we see those that are like in Solo style, Jogja style, any style, whatever came up that was good was immediately copied. It was, I call this like one of the first iterations of fast fashion, because it was a big problem in the industry. As soon as one design became popular, it was just copied everywhere. Here we have the stand of display of Eliza van Soylen and Jacqueline Charlotte Simonette, or Van Arden, and this is their display. And as you can see, you have this kind of Solo Sidomulyo kind of textile to the buketan pieces, and they're showing quite a wide range. And here you can see also the album that was later used that was presented to Jasper. And just wanted to highlight the difference. So here you see these very regular patterns for Van Soylen's batik. So here, this is a row of lar or Garuda wings. And this is also maybe a jolly or the pavilion motif. And it's just rows of repeated patterns. And even for Van Soylen, this is batik that was put up. If you look at this arrangement of bouquets, they are almost exactly the same. Here, again, just a variety of batiks that were on display. And just want you to take note of this zigzag piece, which Nyonya Oeij Soen King makes one. So you have this buketan style, you have Central Javanese style, and this kind which is sort of more traditional North Coast, and all this was being produced in Pekalongan at that time. So this is a close-up of this zigzag piece, which is done in a much older style, And in the publication for this exhibition, the silver medals were won by the two Eurasian ladies, and this bronze medal by also another lady, Miss Willems from Banyumas, and then the honorary diplomas were given to 116 batik makers, and interestingly, most of them are Javanese and Arab of descent, including the Bupati of Pemalang and the Bupati of Rembang. These are the residents, but and also 10 Chinese batik makers were mentioned, but sadly not Nyonya Oeij Soen King. Yeah, so this is the wonderful list of these batik makers in 1923. Just a little snapshot of the kind of cottons that were available in Pekalongan at that time. So here you see batik yang halus betul. So these are the fine, this is Muslim, which is the fine cottons. So this Muslim buat bikin batik yang halus betul. So this is the cottons to make the very finest batiks. And here, Muslim buat bikin batik yang halus. So super fine for batiks of average quality. Batik yang kasar, so rough batiks, and kasar murah, and batik kasar murah. So this is for very cheap, rough batik. So, later on, Miki and Lynn will share a little bit more about the varying qualities, very, very fascinating, which we discovered. It was, actually, I have to say that it was wonderful to collaborate with two of them as we dove deeply into looking very closely at the textiles. And this also gives us a clue that what was available in Pekalongan is a whole range of cottons. So now we look at what she produced. So this is the piece that you see as you walk into the gallery. Now this might look very traditional to you. So my thing is this unseen, modernity unseen, is how something that might appear so traditional and classic is actually pretty wild. So this would recall a kind of batik with Garuda, the Garuda, and you can see from the wings. But what has Nyonya Oeij Soen King done here? It's not a Garuda, because instead of the fantail, we see a flower, perhaps, and these tendrils like roots, the root of a plant. So it's some kind of surreal thing, a very ambiguous thing that she's made. Also bear in mind how the sizes are all different and they all face different directions. So there is this attempt to not make it regular at all. Quite clearly you see here, plus these very strange flowers, also with wings. You know, there are all these wing flowers here. And this was the granddaughter Jane Handel Matona's favorite piece, and it was the piece she chose for display in the Cooper Hewitt Museum in 1985, around the time that Inga McCabe Elliott did her book. I just want to show, this is from the ACM collection, so this is a kain panjang, and look at how a proper cement Garuda, so this is a particular kind of classic Javanese batik is done, solo style. As you can see, it's totally regular, and here you see a proper Garuda with its fantail. This is what it should look like, and with the La at the side, Mount Meru. It has a very set number of motifs that are displayed just very regularly. More examples of these very regularly drawn, and there's a whole hierarchy of how this design goes. And when you see this classic Javanese style, you understand how different Nyonya Oeij Soen King is trying to be. So same when we look at this kain panjang with this jamblang or sort of checkerboard pattern, you know, this crazy range of motifs within. There's no regularity. It's pretty random, but it's actually harder to create a random pattern than to get your worker to just repeat the the rabbit every 2 or 3, or repeat the tortoise. So, but here I think it would be an interesting project to chart how, where all these patterns appear. So this is a classic jamblang, one from the World Museum and the other. You can see that actually the classic pattern has just one motif here, repeated, and here as well. So what she's doing is just completely different, and it's very, very creative, and she's breaking all the rules actually. So in that sense, she's being completely modern. So even in this example by Van Soilen, like a Sido Mulyo solo design, you see it's got this regular la, right, and the joli, and the background in this is what they call bledak, against a white background. It's very classical and very regular. Interestingly, there is one piece from the ACM collection in Indian trade cloth where it was specifically made for the archipelago, and it has this same kind of jamblang design, but again, the Philip motifs in the middle are the same. It's just a basic repeat. So if you look at these, you can appreciate the complexity of Nyonya Oeij Soen King's batiks. This also resonates with the previous Indian piece, and these are inspired by a design called the peksi kurung, or the enclosed bird, but here she's got all kinds of floral and faunal motifs against a complex checkerboard design. And in these early pieces, the two natural colors are Mengkudu red and indigo blue. But if you notice, she's chosen to hide the blue, so the blue is an overdye over the red, so you get two dark colors instead of red and blue. And that's several of the pieces have this palette. The family donated, I forgot to mention, 18 batiks only, 10 sarongs, 7 kain panjang, and 1 pair of trousers. A group of them are all in these dark red and blue colors. Red took a month to dye. It was a combination of Mengkudu root and another root called jirek, which was rich in aluminium. It was like the fixer. So you had to rub this sort of mulch, this wet paste over, and dry and hang and soak again over 30 days to create a solid red like this. This is nice to show it in the exhibition. It's the one with on the mannequin, so you can barely see the design, but it's again this incredible kind of exuberant pattern that is totally uneven. And I think it was one way to counter the competition from copying your design, so you don't repeat your own design. I think so. This at the highest end, this is what makers would do so nobody could copy your design because you never did two of the same anyway. And this has a very charming thing, right? In this what they call the papan, these birds with this little ribbon, and it says Panjang Umur dan Senang Hati, long life and happiness. It's a rather charming wish. And more sarongs and the pair of trousers. Just rushing through these. This very beautiful example with the pair of pheasants. Main thing I want to point out here is if you look at how she's arranged them, they're not even at all. Unlike, as I mentioned, we looked at Van Soilen and the other makers, there's a kind of regularity, or the Central Javanese examples. Here we see the different sizes of each group. It's really irregular, and this is deliberate, it's not accidental. Also, there's a certain kind of fluidity and in the artistry in the way she's taken pains to draw her birds, versus this example here. You can see it's much stiffer in its rendering, and in all her works you see this same fluidity and elegance in the flow and curves. Again, and here's another popular pattern in the 19th century called Kembang Teratai, or basically just a flowering lotus pattern. The sizes. So this also I've just, they're so irregular, and the interesting thing, for example, you see four complete ones and two half ones. You know, it's deliberately imperfect. You know, and the way the sizes are all irregular, and it has a whole mixture of, you know, animals here. This is a mongoose with a snake. Yeah, all kinds of birds. But then again, okay, I also meant to mention that from here we see sometimes she would also expose the blue. So in the earlier examples, the blue was hidden under the red as an overdye to create the dark color. But here we see this, you know, what we call bang biru, or red and blue batiks. And these are all the same. And interestingly, so she also produced some that were much more regular. This is completely regular in terms of size, and same for this one. And they really recall chintzes. Yeah, I'll just quickly run through these. And yeah, back to the zigzag, I just want to raise another point. So she produced really fine batiks in all kinds of styles. And this is totally confused. This is totally, actually, no, it's the spanner in the works in how batiks have been characterized. And in the past, if you look at any book, certain batiks would be ascribed to certain towns. So for example, here there's another one in the ACM, which is described as being from Cirebon or Indramayu. It's got the same pattern. Sorry, the Roots doesn't have better pictures. This is the best I could get. Rudosmen has one called from Lasem or Semarang. And here is another one in our family collection. Basically, they could have been produced anywhere along the north coast, and I would say it's actually safer just to say vaguely north coast of Java than to ascribe place of production, unless in the case of Nyonya Oeij Soen King, we know clearly through you know, family tradition that it was produced in Pekalongan. But these things could be made anywhere, and you know, the danger now is these things are just basically there isn't any proof that they were made in all these towns when you look in these books. Yeah, just towards the end of her career in the 1920s, Nyonya Oeij Soen King changed her style, and I think she was responding to the whole buketan idea and fashion, and caving into that kind of taste. So no more white backgrounds. The other thing I just forgot to mention, okay, for example, if you look here, you see that this is not Nyonya Oeij Soen King, but this maker, the red just bleeds much more. There's a lot of crackle and imperfections. But Nyonya Oeij Soen King's batiks are all kind of flawless. You don't see any wax cracks. And as you know, in batik, it's really hard to produce a batik with a lot of white. Basically, you have to cover everything and make sure the wax does not crack. As far as I understand, they do that by adding tallow or beef fat into the wax to make it malleable, and so that it's not brittle and doesn't crack. So these are masterpieces because you don't see any wax crackles. Here you can see clearly it's more of the crackle. Yeah, and just to highlight how one producer could make flowers in different styles, not just she didn't have a set style. And I think it's interesting also to think about at the highest end, you weren't restricted to producing work in one style. So similarly, she could draw birds that were more naturalistic on the left to these more abstract, like Merak Nigel, and these are much more connected to the old Javanese court styles. And who were the wearers? So these wealthy clients who bought the batiks, and you know, so they were never ever found in the shops, were ladies like this wearing very, very fine batiks, and we don't know who they are. They're families of, you know, all over Java. There were always this ranking of officials that were appointed by the Dutch as kapitans and lieutenants, and major town had one, and so there were many patrons at the time for this high-level quality of batik. So here we see these kinds of ladies wearing the baju peki, the Chinese-style blouse with a lace but kabaya-inspired decorations. And similarly here, these wealthy ladies with these specially ordered batiks in Java. I love to share this picture, which belonged to my friend, who's now passed away, but he shared these pictures with me of this very elegant Nyonya in Java. I particularly like this one with the fur, or maybe ostrich stole or something. Anyway, very fancy. But you can see she's wearing one of these very fine, naturally dyed cloths. And this one, like the last two from the 1920s, that are kind of between the buketan and traditional styles. It's evolving styles. Yeah, and that's all I am sharing today. And just maybe as a closing statement that, yeah, it allows us to really think about art and culture and how it is formed, and to question whether anything has a pure form, whether anything, if you trace beyond that pure form, you get to another level of rojak or gado-gado. And, the Peranakan lens allows us to have fun thinking about the mixed ancestry of everything, yeah, which is what we at the Peranakan Museum and Clem and the ACM champion. And Singapore as being the prime place to think about these networks and connections and how everything is connected through shared heritage. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for Peter for his fascinating story about batiks made by Nyonya Oeij Soen King. From here, Lynn and myself will take over to talk about some technical analysis and scientific analysis of the batiks made by this first generation of Nyonya Oeij Soen King. Yes, and thanks for ACM to give us the opportunity to share our findings of this ongoing research. Okay, our journey began with one email, came from Naomi and Peter one day. So ACM had the great acquisition of the remarkable collection spanning 3 generations of Pekalongan batik making family. And among these pieces, there were several unsigned works and believed to be done by Oeij Soen King, the family's first generation maker. The museum posed challenging question to us. Could dye analysis help attribute these unsigned pieces to Nyonya Oeij Soen King? And we approached this question very carefully. While dye analysis could certainly identify the type of dyes used, but we needed to determine whether it could provide the detailed fingerprint necessary to attribute to Oeij Soen King. After all, dye analysis typically offers qualitative rather than quantitative result. So however, we recognize this is a great opportunity and research could open new avenues of understanding. So we developed these 3 key questions. So could scientific analysis establish a characteristic material signature of Nyonya Oeij Soen King's work? What materials and technical relationship exist between these batiks and other contemporaneous pieces? And could we identify distinct markers that reliably differentiate Oeij's work from that of other makers? So before sharing our findings, let me briefly explain batik making process. I know some of you probably know, but batik is created by applying hot wax to fabric before dyeing. So here you see 3 women using chantin, a small copper vessel with a spout that enables a precise wax application. And the wax creates a barrier and protecting specific area from dyes. So think of batik as a painting in reverse. So waxed area retain their original color, while unwaxed areas absorb the dyes. Complex design requires multiple cycles of waxing and dyeing, with the most intricate pieces takes months or even years to complete. So our research centered on Pekalongan. So Peter already mentioned, so this is a historic port city on Java's north coast. By the 19th century, this vibrant hub of batik innovation was absorbing Chinese, Arab, Indian, and European influences and creating what became known as a batik pesisir and the distinctive coastal style. So we started our research with our preliminary examination. So that helps shape our research methodology. So the 16 pieces believed to be done by Nyonya Oeij Soen King's work came in different shapes. And they were well preserved, and each worked on thin, smooth, and tightly woven cotton. And unlike later pieces from her family workshop, they were not signed and no signature or stamps. So while we suspected it might be very difficult to differentiate workshops through fabric choice alone, as they likely access the same trade networks, we wanted to understand, did each workshop prefer specific type of cotton, or did they draw from the same materials sources? We also began looking for other distinguishing characteristics. What particularly caught our attention were 4 distinct color palettes: red, blue, red, dark red, blue, dark blue, dark red, and dark blue, and the last one is red and black. So while other colors appeared, including yellow, prevalence of these red combinations arise a possibility. Could this specific red serve as Oeij's artistic signature? So to investigating these possibilities, we decided to examine 3 crucial components of these batiks: the fabric, seeking any distinctive characteristics in the cloths used by the maker; the colors, particularly those recurring reds that might indicate preferred shades by different workshops; the dye composition, identifying both natural and synthetic sources, and possible unique recipe that could identify specific makers. While wax formula might have provided additional insights, unfortunately, there was no wax residues left on the batik, so we are not able to study. To establish context, we compare Oeij's batik with signed works by 3 other prominent makers from the same period. Thanks to Peter's generous access to his collection, we analyzed pieces by also Eliza van Zuiven, Johanna Jans, and On Hon Him. And these comparative pieces carried signature and providing reliable reference points for our analysis. And they all come from the north coastal of Java, and pesisir batiks, 3 workshops from Pekalongan, and 1 from Lasem. So let me share our fabric analysis findings, and later Lynn will talk about colors and dyes. Okay, so we approached the fabric examination very systematically, analyzing 3 key aspects. First, we analyzed the weave structure and thread counts, documenting both how threads interlace and their density per centimeter, using relatively simple magnifier like linen thread. And second, we examined thread construction, studying how yarns are made and their twist characteristic using digital microscope. And then the last, we conducted fiber identification to determine the exact materials used in those historic textiles. So we examined the fabric from macro to micro. So our first findings concern the weave structure, how threads interlace to form the fabric. All 36 batiks used plain weave, with threads crossing over and under each other alternatively. These were balanced plain weave, meaning nearly equal numbers of vertical and horizontal threads. Then we also counted the threads, much like measuring the resolution of the digital image. So we found that our samples containing between 78 to 97 threads per centimeter. And then the next, at the microscopic level, we examine yarn ply and yarn twist, essentially how the fibers are spun together. So our analysis revealed that both warp and weft thread from the 36 samples were woven with single yarn, has no ply. So this type. We also look at the direction of the twist of warp and weft respectively. Although three fabrics look very similar here, each have different combination of yarn twist. The 36 samples can be classified into 3 distinct twist combinations here. Even batik with similar thread counts, but different twist patterns, that indicates they are entirely different fabric sources. So to recap, our analysis revealed that all workshops, including Oeij's workshop, used 100% plain weave cotton for both warp and weft threads. And they were made with single ply yarns. However, we observed varying weave counts and twist combinations. And these parameters can be worth comparing to find some differences between workshops. So it's a bit too busy slides, but the graph presents a comprehensive analysis and comparison of all 36 samples with different colors representing each batik workshop. So the horizontal bar shows thread counts. The longer the bar, the higher the counts, with indication of thread twist for warp and weft. So looking at distribution, we found 3 distinct groups. So 40 batiks, exceptional quality with over 90 threads per centimeter. This range. And then 20 pieces in the middle range, between 80 to 90 thread. This range. And just 2 pieces below 80 threads. So notably, Oeij's pieces span all these ranges and show various twist combinations, suggesting how workshop, like others, used a range of available fabrics, like what Peter mentioned just now. So the black is from Oeij's workshop, so it appears very high count to the middle and even the lower ones. But to understand what these thread counts means, we face the challenges. Few historical records define fabric standards from this period, and Van Rogen documented 4 distinct types of cotton qualities without indicating thread counts. But even today, these terms are loosely used by batik makers and manufacturers. So take primissima. Consider the finest quality cotton for batik making, but there is no standardized definition. This is perhaps only cultural established classification used. So to bridge this gap, we had the opportunity to visit this shop called Toko German, a historic fabric supplier still operating in Pekalongan. By examining their current batik fabrics, particularly their primissima grade, we could create a contemporary reference point for understanding historical fabric quality. So what we found at Toko German was quite interesting. So their finest grade cotton primissima contains approximately 90 thread per centimeter, similar to our studied piece. And while we needed to expand our research to include more number of samples, our initial findings are promising. Most of our batik samples that we studied match or even exceed today's highest quality batik cotton. And among batik artisans, some say fabric cannot be labeled as primissima unless it reaches 85 and above thread counts. So this suggests most of our sample from our study would qualify as a primissima grade. Even our 2 samples with slightly lower thread counts exceeded the quality of the today's prima cotton from Toko German, indicating that even these 2 historic pieces in our study with slightly lower thread counts made with still remarkably fine cotton. So compare with this and our samples here. So such high thread counts wasn't just for a luxury. They were essential for creating the smooth, tight surface needed for precise wax application and intricate designs to create. Okay, so for the summary for my parts, so our analysis leads to several interesting conclusions. Analysis of fabric and thread revealed that batik workshop did not exclusively use specific type of cotton, but those workshops used a finest quality cotton which are available back then. And Pekalongan and Lasem as a northern Japanese ports in the late 19th to early 20th century might have access to diverse cotton fabric varieties through trade. However, this study also highlights areas needing further study. What our findings suggest is that the distinction between workshops lie not in their choice of cotton fabric, but in how they use them, and their artistic and technical expertise in creating design and applying dyes. So now I will hand over to Lynn. She will talk about more interesting part of the dyes and colors. Thank you.
Thank you, Miki. Good evening. So now I'll talk more about the color analysis. When I first started on this project and examined these batiks close up, I find that the colors are really rich and vibrant. And it's like telling me to analyze them. So when we were looking through these batiks up close, we had these questions. Can we use color as a means to compare these batiks? How consistent is the color of the Oeij batiks? So for example, we have 16 batiks, and we look at the colors. Are they very similar or different? Can we use color to distinguish Oeij's works from other makers? So can we use color as a benchmark to find the maker's signature? So when we were looking at all these 36 batiks, reds consistently shows up in all the batik. So this is something that we can use to compare. So we focus just on the reds. So let us take a look at Oeij's batiks. So what do you think of this red? So in my perspective, I would say it's very rich, solid, vibrant color. Then for the Lasem reds, I would think it's slightly brighter. Then Venezuelan and Jejans, they seem to have other tones. But what I just said is all very subjective, right? What I perceive as a color will be different from what you perceive or another person perceives. Because color depends on the viewing angle and the light source. So we really need an objective tool to help us analyze color. So thanks to Richard Hunter, who defines color in this color space, where we can use 3 numerical coordinates, L, A, and B values to define color. So L refers to how bright or dark a color is, and A, how green or red, and B, how blue or yellow. So it just requires a simple colorimeter of the size of my palm, and we just place it on the object, and you can identify these LAB values, and you will generate a pseudo color for us to visualize it digitally on the screen. So this is what manufacturing industries use to check the consistency of their products. But of course, I'm using it to test handmade batiks. So we will see some kind of variation. So on this handmade batik, I would like to point out what Peter just mentioned about the complex duplicate. Yeah. So over here, we can see the different kinds of, different areas, they have different kinds of color. So when we plot these LAB values into one 3D graph, we can see the individual measurements, okay, over here. So it's like a spread, it's not very consistent. And we can also tell the average color from this batik. That is the green color. So if I repeat these colorimetric measurements on the rest of the 35 batiks and plot it onto the same graph, this is what I will get. So the green dots represent the Oeij, and the red dots represent the Ong from ACM, and the blue dots and Venezuelan, and the gray dots Zhejians. So what do these data tell us? So here we can see two groups of reds. Okay, one over here, which I call it the dark reds, and one over here, more of the primary reds or the mainstream. So the dark reds, they tend to have more blue. You see that it's more B, and that's because they add more blue indigo to the red dye. It's like an over dye of maroon red with blue indigo. So there's something that we notice as well from this chart, that the Oeij and ACM reds, they closely overlap, right? The green dots and the red dots. And this seems to suggest that the Chinese origins have a particular preference to the kind of red shade that they want to achieve. And interestingly, for the Eurasian and European tastes, for Venezuelan and Zhejians, the reds tend to deviate from these mainstream reds. So they tend to be more adventurous in terms of their choice of colors. So other than being able to tell the different kinds of color shades that were produced by the makers, this color is also due to the availability of dye at that time, at that place. But it didn't really answer the question of whether Oeij's batiks can be differentiated from other makers. Okay, as we can see, the Oeij's reds actually overlap with other makers, but still it gives us certain results. Now I'll move on to the dye analysis, and for this part, we would like to find out more about what are the dyes that compose the color. To do dye analysis, we need to take a sample, and fortunately, we are able to get some samples from the frays at the edges, or like loose threads at the top, or sometimes you can find in the center. So Miki and I, we had to go through each and every area of the batik just to look out for this kind of areas for sampling. So what are the available methods? An all-time favorite and a reliable method is the HPLC-MS, which is high-pressure liquid chromatography mass spectrometry. So what this technique does is, first, we have that red thread, and we extract the red dye solution into a liquid. Then we inject into this instrument, and it will be able to separate these dyes into different components and analyze these organic molecules. And it's very reliable. But some research groups, they also use GCMS, or gas chromatography mass spectrometry. And this has slightly other advantages because they are able to tell us the oils or wax or cellulose fibers. Okay, so this area are those signals, but only a very, very small percentage due to the dye. And more recently, another method that we can use is SERS, Surface Enhanced Raman Spectroscopy. And this technique is used for analyzing dyes, not just in historical textiles, but also in paintings. And what it gives is a fingerprint spectrum like this to tell you the chemical composition of the dye. The amount of sample size required is much smaller, just a few strands of fibers, and you can get that information. So how the procedure works, you put the fiber in this vessel, which contains the hydrofluoric acid. And this is a very dangerous acid, I must say. This Acid will help to break the bond between the dye, mordant, and fiber so as to release the dye. And then we add the silver nanoparticles droplet here to enhance the signal before analysis with the Raman spectroscopy. And finally, we get this fingerprint spectrum. But there are two limitations with regards to the source. Okay, firstly, it's not able to separate the dyes just like chromatography techniques could. So it's not very good for analyzing mixtures. Then secondly, this source has a limited database, so it's not very good for identification. However, we can still use source for the purpose of this research to compare the batiks, how similar and how different they are. And that's why we use source for this batiks analysis. So after analyzing the 36 batiks with source, we were able to get these three distinct spectra. We just label them loosely as A, B, and C. And we plot against the batik makers. So you can see the type of dyes that are being used by each maker. And it seems like there is no particular preference or trend to what kind of dye that they use. So you see for Oeij, they may use A and B, On A, B, and C, Vanzillen A and C, and Gens A, B. But if we increase the sample data set, we may be able to find another piece of Oeij that contains C. We are not sure. And because of this, we cannot say that there's any unique red dye that differentiates Oeij from other makers. However, we want to identify the dyes A, B, and C. Okay, so in order to do that, first we have to understand what kind of dyes were usually used in Indonesian textiles. So we went through literature, historical records, and these are some of the dyes. Very commonly documented is the mengkudu, morinda, and you can see these roots over here. Madder is also used since antiquity, and anatole seeds, if you use your fingers to crush them, you can just see the red dye coming off. And safflower, the petals can be used to create a range of shades from orange, yellow, pink to red. And sapan wood to give a reddish-brown color, but sometimes it is also added with morinda. And even insect like lead dyes has also been used. And not to forget synthetic dyes. If the work is produced around the 1900s, it's possible to find it. So why do I need to do this research? It's so that we can get the reference materials of these dyes, and then I conducted the source spectrum and compared the reference of the source spectrum with the unknown dyes A, B, and C. So now we can clearly see that dye A matches very well to morinda citrifolia. Yeah, you see the peaks really match very well. So what is morinda citrifolia? Well, I didn't know it until I was doing this research, and just outside where I work, I see there are a lot of morinda citrifolia trees, at least 5 of them. And you probably noticed this in Singapore. So it comes with this noni fruit. They say when you eat this fruit, you prevent cancer. So underneath the soil, the roots contain the rich red dye of morinda. But people don't know. And just 2 weeks ago, NEA removed all these trees. As Peter mentioned, the morinda dyeing is really laborious, time-consuming, takes a long time, 1 month. This bark of the morinda have contained this anthraquinone red dye. You have to chip off the bark, immerse it in water, and then you add the simplocos, which is a natural alarm accumulator. And that helps to bind the dye to the fiber. So a very tedious process. And we spoke to some dyers in Singapore and also in Java recently. And nowadays, nobody can do Morinda dyeing. Probably you can still find Morinda dyeing in the Lesser Sunda Islands in Indonesia. Okay, so it's like somewhat a lost technique. Even if they try to recreate, you cannot get that rich red that you see in our 1920s batiks. Now, what about the dye bee? So we tried to identify this, but unfortunately, no luck. We cannot match to any known references. And for dye C, we think it matches really well to this Che root or synthetic alizarin. And Che root is also known as Odenlandia umbellata, and this root is known to be cultivated in Indonesia as a weed. But it's not known to be used for dyeing. So we were quite perplexed. Is Che root really present? And Che root is also known to be used in Indian textiles, okay, but not really recorded for Indonesian textiles. So then I was talking to another scientist, Diego Tamburini from the British Museum, and he graciously helped me analyze these two samples, the dye B and dye C, with HPLC-MS. And the results turned out to be synthetic alizarin. So these are variations of synthetic alizarin. And these results really make much more sense, okay, because then it means that in the 1900s, the 1920s, these early batik makers are already using synthetics. So in conclusion, the dye A is identified as the natural morinda, and dye B and C as synthetic alizarin. So if we look back at this graph again, for every maker, they still have a lot of batiks that use morinda, because at that point of time, that is the dye that was produced or available to them. But they are also quite receptive to the use of synthetics, more so than what we previously thought. So I'd just like to highlight that there will be an erratum on the identification of Che root. In our essay published in the Batik Nyonyas book, dye C was originally identified as Che root, but now is corrected to be identified as synthetic alizarin with the new results from HPLC. And this will be corrected in the future prints. So in conclusion, how do Oeij's batiks compare to contemporaneous batiks from the same region and similar period in terms of the fabric, color, and dye? So as Miki has shared, the fabric is identified as cotton and mostly primissima, which is the very superfine quality fabric. And there are, of course, many variations from unknown suppliers. And then for the color, we find that the Oeij and Lasem colors are very close, whereas Van Zuylen and Jejens deviate from the mainstream color. However, it's not able to differentiate Oeij's batiks from the rest. And for dyes, the batik makers had access to natural morinda as well as different kinds of synthetic alizarins. And lastly, back to the curatorial question. Can these materials reliably differentiate Oeij Soen King's works from other makers? Well, you probably know the answer. I repeated. So the answer is no, because they use similar materials. However, from this research, I think we also uncover other things. For example, the dyes that were used or available at that time, we didn't know before starting this research, and it wasn't documented anywhere. So as a future work, we hope to, we will be continuing this HPLC analysis with the British Museum as a collaboration on the rest of the red dyes. So hopefully it can provide us more insights into the type of red dyes that were available to these batik makers at the time. And I would really like to thank this group of people who helped us along our journey in this dye research. So Peter, Naomi, and Darryl, for, we went through all the interpretation of all these results together. and also Diego from the British Museum for the HBR-CMS analysis, and Jennifer from CCI, who helped in the GCMS analysis, Shijie, Sundar, and Botanical Gardens for collecting some dye references. We also spoke to Sabine and Art, who were the first authors to analyze the Francophone batiks from Semarang. We also engaged Camilo from NUS to try out some LCMS analysis, and also visited Pekalongan batik makers like Widyanti, Zahid, and Sapuan, who exchanged more information about batiks. And also thanks to the Singaporean dyers who discussed with us on the dyes and batiks. All right, thank you to you for being a wonderful audience too.
Okay, so we have overrun by a bit, but we still have time to take a questions or two. So any questions from the floor? Yeah, the lady there. The mic is coming over to you.
May I just,
Yeah, sure.
sorry if I may. Yeah, I take a concluding remark from the organization of the two discussions. What really fascinated me was how, the preconception was that we were going to find something quite industrial in terms of how people produce batik, but it turns out to be very organic, and people just used whatever they could find, so there was no consistency in the choice of cotton that they used, and also dyes, and also interestingly, in Yasun Pegadi, one of the books written about 100 years ago on dyes, he also mentioned that in some cases in Pekalongan, well, I mean, people use either natural and guri, or they call it something like mengkudu belanda or something, which was the synthetic dyes. So he had already mentioned that people were using combinations of the two in Pekalongan in the 1910s. So, and it's nice that this is confirmed in this case. And I also think quite interestingly, if I'm not mistaken, the pieces that have the synthetic dyes for Nyonya Oeij Soen King were the last two produced that so it was quite good that curatorially, if the two that we had guessed were from the later period. There were only two examples that we showed that were kind of like with the different designs, are the ones with the synthetic dyes as well. So it's a nice, happy collaboration.
The question, yeah.
Peter has partly answered my question, but Pekalongan batik my impression is that they tend to be more colorful compared to traditional Jogja or Solo batik. Is there any reason that might be the case? Is it apart from the mixture of, is it a common practice that they mix the synthetic and the natural dye material, or do they have more channels to more synthetic materials compared to other regions? Thank you.
I think probably, I mean, there's not enough work done on analyzing all the different batiks produced, but I'm sure the response was fairly similar, that there was a transition in the late 19th century, and people were moving towards synthetic dyes. So different people would have transitioned at a different point or combined. But of course, the further back in the 19th century you go, it would have just been purely all natural dyes. And then with the introduction of the synthetic dyes, and I think one of the early forms would been Turkey red. And we read of these imports coming into Singapore, for example. It's sort of the early kind of synthetic red, or kind of processed red anyway, that was coming in. And So the batik industry responded to these changes and increasing availability of other kinds of dyes. But in terms of colorways, I think it's often forgotten that if you look at old Javanese texts, the royal figures described in these old Javanese texts are often wearing very bright clothes. So this focus on soga brown and indigo blue that emerged in the courts, I think, was a response to the wide availability of all these colors, with reds, and everybody could wear all these colors. So they kind of created, I believe, a kind of reverse elitism by restricting the colors. But if you look at historical, very old Javanese texts, red is described as red sinjang, the kain panjang called sinjang. Red bright colors were described in from 8th, 9th, very old Javanese texts. So it's wrong to think that the royal courts did not favor colors. So it's also this myth that in Pekalongan, batiks are very colorful, and so I think that happened quite late. It was a modern thing. So if you look at like for example, all the Indian trade textiles, red was such a luxury color, and this was not the red was not. Nobody knew how to make this red except in India, so these had to be imported. And when Raffles wrote the history of Java in 1817, he mentioned that red was very hard to produce, color fast, and local attempts had all failed. And I found one record in the Chinese court of Batavia from the late 18th century, which mentions that it was a case where an investor was suing a dyer because he put money into producing batik and they all faded after it was produced. So it showed that in the batik industry in the late 18th century, red was still a challenge. But by the 1820s, 30s, you see in the Singapore newspapers incredible imports of Javanese batik. So I have a feeling by then, and then you also read in the Kongguan archives a lot of dyers from China moving to Java, and there are sort of permits for dyers. So somebody figured out how to dye the reds and to produce enough for commercial quantities for export to Singapore. And many were described as handkerchiefs and sarongs. And at the same time, also imitation batiks from Europe were coming in. So it was all this network of bright colors. And so it's often just thought as something from the north coast of, and not forgetting that Batavia, Jakarta was a big center, and they produce all kinds of batik in many colors as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. So do we have any other questions? Maybe one more. The gentleman in red.
Hello. Could I return to the topic of the alizarin and ask about the economic or trade connections that's revealed through this? Like, was it made for batik makers, or was it just a dye that was going around? Where could it have come from?
Yeah, the synthetic alizarin.
I mean, looking at the Straits Times, you see reports that about the excitement of Turkey red, and of course this really influenced textile production all over the world. And places like Manchester and Scotland and in the Netherlands were starting to produce printed cottons in machine woven cotton and machine printed designs that were exported all over the world, and in such huge quantities for such low prices. So as you know, this totally destroyed the Indian monopoly of cotton and supremacy of cotton in the 18th century. And so Java responded to this by adapting to the new available dyes as a response. I mean, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, it was sort of a global thing, and it had its impact in Java and in the commercialization of batik production. But fascinatingly, as your studies have shown, that people responded in various ways and there was no consistency at all. Yeah.
Lynn and Miki, do you have anything to add on to this on synthetic alizarin? Okay, so yeah, maybe we have come to the end of this session. So thank you once again to Peter, Miki, and Lynn for this enriching talk and for answering all the questions. And for the audience, we hope you will visit the Batik Nyonyas exhibition at the Peranakan Museum if you haven't done so. It's on until the 31st of August. So as we end this talk, I would like to highlight the next and final Batik Nyonyas talk that will happen. So this will take place at the Peranakan Museum itself in the Ixora room. Do join us there for a talk by Peter, titled Gentile Nyonya Mind Bending Batik, The Unconventional Life and Art of Nyonya Oeij Soen King on 21st of August at 7 p.m. And also, we would really appreciate if you could give us your feedback by scanning the QR code on the screen. It will help us improve the way we organize our lectures. So we hope to see you back again for the next talk, and thank you and have a great evening ahead.